B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, February 1st, 2019. Yes, there are two R's in February. And as the Midwest struggles through the Arctic vortex, there's supposed to be a huge swing in temperatures from 40 below zero to 50 degrees in Chicago by Saturday. Wow. Well, as you may know, I'm deeply concerned about the rush to support a coup in Venezuela and the interests of the Trump administration and its oligarch supporters in the oil reserves, the gold reserves, and in toppling a socialist government. That's really the agenda there, decoded and summarized. And what is stunning to me is the way the media is complicit, just like we saw in the run-up to the war against Iraq, and that the Democrats are really having a hard time with this issue. Many of them will make coded comments about how, well, I don't support Trump on military action, but everybody knows that Maduro's got to go. And this attitude is extremely dangerous. Yesterday, Max Blumenthal, who earns more respect from me every time I see his work, he posted a video based on a stroll on Capitol Hill and in some of the congressional offices. And he chose his words carefully. Because, as you know, the Capitol is awash in the Russiagate narrative. Lots of Democrats believe that Russia meddled in our election in 2016. And so Max Blumenthal repeatedly asked members of Congress, hey, are we meddling in Venezuela, and do you approve?
Do you think the U.S. is meddling in Venezuela?
I don't think so. I mean, we're the superpower in the world.
So the video runs about 4 minutes.
Undermine democracy, not just in our country, but in other countries as well.
That's Nancy Pelosi's rationalization, that we're fighting the Russians by supporting this puppet who has arisen in Venezuela.
Meddling if Russia were to declare Nancy Pelosi the president of the U.S.
I haven't thought about that. She's not president of the United States, I'll tell you that.
It's a pretty desperate situation over there, yeah.
So we should be meddling, is what you're saying.
The problem is when you meddle, you cause locals to rebel against that. So it's a tough call.
Maduro's troops or goons went into the ghetto.
Is it Lacey Clay of Missouri?
Decided they were going to take over.
Isn't he the president of the country?
I'm going to pause it here, and I encourage you to watch the video. I won't spoil it for you. It's not spoilable. But Lacey Gray, in the end, is goaded by Max Blumenthal into saying, well, I didn't support the interventions in Haiti. And, on balance, I'm not really a big fan of intervention in Venezuela. But as he walked away, he said, hey, my issue is banks and finance, not Venezuela. And he even got a brief encounter with the darling of the progressive left today, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's only seconds long, but the congresswoman herself pops her head out the door of her office as Blumenthal's camera is rolling. And when he asks if we should be meddling in Venezuela, she quickly recoils, gets ready to close the door, and says, we're working on a statement about that. And even Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii who has staked out a position against regime change wars, she's issued a couple of video statements where she is definitely opposed to Trump's moves. But she splits the baby by taking the common stance that Maduro's got to go. And if you listened yet to my in-depth interview with Dan Kovalik, who was an election observer in Venezuela last year, and in the conversation he goes into details on why that election was in fact legitimate. But most elected officials of both parties are just taking the line. The election was illegitimate. Maduro is illegitimate, and it's somehow democratic to support his removal from office. It's completely incoherent. But I believe, as I shared with Kovalik, that the Russiagate narrative and the way it has swept and brainwashed the minds of so many Democrats has left them ripe for calls for aggressive, including military action. And by tagging Maduro and the government there as socialist, it often seals the deal for low-information Americans. I'll put it as politely as I can. So I want to recommend the latest post by Kevin Gosztola at Shadowproof, where the headline reads, "Challenging the Liberal Case for Trump Administration's Coup in Venezuela." And he zeroes in on a woman named Frida Gittes, a contributing columnist for CNN and the Washington Post, who is defending Democrats who support Trump's policy of intervention in Venezuela. And I've linked to his article. I want you to read it. But he basically says, look, top Democrats and Republicans largely support the regime change operation. Most Western media outlets uncritically amplify the message of the opposition. There aren't many columns at prominent U.S. media outlets which make the case against recognizing Guaido as the country's legitimate president. And that is true. I've got a couple of examples for you coming up here. So Gittes argues that America's leftists undercut their own criticism of Trump's autocratic transgressions when they fail to call them out in Venezuela. Wow. So this is the guy who supports strongmen like Duterte and the Saudis and any kind of dictator he can find, like al-Sisi in Egypt. But somehow Trump is siding with those advocating for liberal democracy. That's bullshit. He's advocating for an oil grab by any means necessary, and he'll use any excuse to do it. Then Gosztola zeroes in on the alleged support from 50 nations, including Latin American countries and Canada. They formed the Lima Group in 2017. And the backstory there is the Organization of American States was not willing to call for the ouster of Maduro. So they form a club, the Lima Group. It's Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, and Peru. And the only country that has declined to recognize Guaido is Mexico. And Gosztola goes through the conservative and strong men who are now in charge in Brazil, Honduras, Guatemala, Paraguay, and Colombia. Oh, and Chile, too. So I think this is a really well-written piece that covers a lot of important issues, and I hope you will take a look at it. Meanwhile, the spin and the propaganda continue. In the New York Times, what is called The Interpreter, which suggests that it's an analytical piece and not purely journalism, so to speak. It opens with this stunning, spinned-up scene setter. If it seems impossible that Venezuela's government could have remained in power nearly 2 years into the country's self-imposed economic collapse. I mean, that is just so bizarre. Venezuela didn't choose economic collapse. Oil prices dropped. And Dan Kovalik suggests that that was a scheme hatched by the United States and the Saudis. And I am inclined to believe that myself. But the idea that Maduro, is so corrupt and socialism is such a failure, that this is self-inflicted, I'm sorry. That is, well, it's an ignorant statement, and it's insulting to the intelligence of the reader of The Gray Lady. Here's another quote from this article. Both Nicolas Maduro and the president and Juan Guaido, an opposition lawmaker who's pointed to Mr. Maduro's widely disputed election victory, claim to be Venezuela's legitimate leader. Now that's even-handedness, isn't it? That's balance. But, of course, as I've just pointed out, the widely disputed election claim is never fleshed out. It's just left there like, hey, Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. Everybody knows it. We don't need proof. One more quote. And this is where they try to move into even-handed mode. The protesters who filled the streets of Caracas last week and Mr. Guaido are portraying Maduro as illegitimate. But for now, Guaido has not convinced enough of the power brokers that he is a credible alternative. So they don't air out the issues of the legitimacy, even though the headline reads, "Deeper conflict is behind Venezuela's legitimacy dispute." They accept the notion that Guaido is legitimate, and they blow past all of their previous criticisms of Trump and Bolton and Pompeo, and now Eliot Engel. I did it again today. Let me now issue my correction. And Carl Howard, a listener in Columbus, Ohio, was the first to point it out. Yesterday, I was trying to talk about Elliot Abrams, the Iran-Contra convict who was pardoned by Poppy Bush, who is now in charge of the Venezuela regime change game. And I called him Eliot Engel, who is the New York congressman who is an ultra-Israeli supporter and who is chair of the House, I think, Foreign Relations Committee, if I have it right. Anyway, I meant Elliot Abrams, and now you understand my Freudian slip, and I'm sure Freud would certainly have approved. At any rate, this team of people is not about democracy. It's not about restoring anything for the people of Venezuela. It's not about poverty, starvation, or empty grocery shelves. It is a raw power grab. And it is not being described that way in the corporate media in this country. And even The Guardian from Britain, and I have to say, I have a great article for them later in my stack here, but when it comes to certain subjects, well, they get right in line with the American media, and they become a mouthpiece for our government. So this is a remarkable story at The Guardian today, where they're actually offering a protest forecast. The story starts, mass street protests designed to drive Nicolas Maduro out of office and into exile will sweep cities across Venezuela again on Saturday as Hugo Chávez's successor fights for his political life and the future of their leftist Bolivarian revolution. Maduro, who was first elected in 2013 and returned to office last year in a vote widely regarded as manipulated, has overseen a ruinous slide in the South American country's fortunes. So all of this is to rationalize the undemocratic, extra-legal efforts that are being seen as just okay, as applied to Venezuela. Here's another loaded paragraph in The Guardian's coverage. Maduro and members of his inner circle paint Guaido as a puppet of Donald Trump's White House. What else is he? And part of a U.S.-backed coup, with coup in quotation marks. And then there's a typo here. I see what they're saying. Part of a U.S.-backed coup attempt designed to rout Chávez's leftist dream. So all of this language is so loaded. And for a pro-corporate, centrist American who doesn't know any better, these loaded words like coup attempt and leftist dream and, the description of how he has overseen a ruinous slide. It is just amazing, the yellow journalism in service of this really outrageous operation. Very interesting move by Britain, France, and Germany yesterday. Now, these are the countries who are fighting over Brexit. Now, France and Germany are just part of the European Union, but it's interesting to see that England is able to put aside the Brexit debate and make a deal with these other countries to set up what is called INSTEX. It's Instrument in Support of Trade Exchanges. And this is a way for the European signatories to the nuclear agreement with Iran to stay in that deal because they think it's in their best interests. And on the PBS NewsHour last night, they had a representative, a British guy, who was very politely saying, we don't agree with President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran deal, but it's his right to do so. And it's our right to stay in the deal and to try to maintain it. So what they're doing is an end run. They're going to set up a barter exchange. And by avoiding the American banking system and currency, they are hoping that Trump Co. will not issue sanctions against them for doing business with Iran. And initially, they're going to offer medical supplies and pharmaceuticals that are in short supply in Iran. And this is something I fully support. I think it shows how empty Trump's move was to exit the Iranian deal. And even this week, he is saying that his intelligence officials need to go back to school because they don't agree with him about the threat posed by Iran. And the single source for Trump's superior intelligence about that is a guy named Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, as I said the other day, I'm loath to get between Trump and the deep state. But in this case, he's wrong. Now, here's a fascinating story. We told you yesterday about Mitch McConnell separating himself from the president on foreign policy. It's a fresh move. We haven't really seen it before. And yesterday, his resolution got a 68 to 23 vote in the Senate, and so it is likely to pass when it comes up for the ultimate vote. What I find fascinating here is that Mitch McConnell is telling his president not to pull out of Syria and Afghanistan. And as you know, I support the president's intention, not the way he's tried to do it, and the way he has been stalled by, deep state actors. But this is fascinating because Senate liberals, many of them exploring presidential runs, voted against the measure, signaling a growing willingness in the party to question long-running conflicts. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand had previously endorsed Trump's decision to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan. Bernie quoted, "We've been in Afghanistan for a longer period than any war in American history. Syria, we've been there too long, and we've got to get out. What McConnell is saying is, let's maintain the status quo." Virtually every senator considering a White House run voted against the McConnell resolution, including Sanders, Warren, Gillibrand, Booker, Harris, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, and so I find that very interesting. It's opportunism on their part because they never stood up and said, we demand a war powers vote. It is our prerogative to set war powers and restrictions on them. They didn't stand up to Bush. They didn't stand up to Obama. They haven't stood up to Trump. But when it's convenient for them to cast a vote that is meaningless, that's how they operate. Now, this is the troubling part. Over in the House of Representatives, newly elected Democrat from New Jersey, Tom Malinowski, has teamed up with Mike Gallagher, a Republican of Wisconsin, with two bills that seek to block the Trump administration from abruptly withdrawing troops from Syria and from South Korea. Now, let's remember that Tom Malinowski showed up among the Democrats recruited to run for Congress in 2018 who have a background in intelligence, military, etc. Now, for Malinowski, it's a little more complicated. He used to be the executive director of Human Rights Watch. Then he was recruited into the Obama State Department, and his colors have changed. And the idea that he would want to support continuing to keep a measly 2,000 American troops in Syria, I find mind-boggling. So, speaking of those presidential candidates, Cory Booker has officially announced via a video released today that he is running for president. The New Jersey senator, former mayor of Newark, was elected to the Senate in 2013, and he said that he won't accept campaign donations from corporate political action committees and lobbyists. He's a big friend of Wall Street, and frankly, how can I say it? I remain ready to be impressed by Cory Booker, but it hasn't happened yet. Now, Sherrod Brown, a guy who I've known since he was in the House of Representatives, comes out of Mansfield, Ohio, and I myself am a Buckeye originally. He has not officially announced, but he held a rally at a warehouse of a company, something about USA. I don't know what it is. Anyway, he is going to Iowa to test the waters, and he has, I think, a compelling message. He says too often people, Democratic pundits and activists, act like our party has to choose between advocating for strong progressive values that excite our base, which we do, or talking to working class voters about their lives. So he's calling his first effort the Dignity of Work Tour. And he says for him, it's not either or. He will always do both. Another quote from Brown, Donald Trump doesn't respect the dignity of work. He has used his phony populism to divide Americans and demonize immigrants. He uses phony populism to distract from the fact that he's used the White House to enrich billionaires like himself. Populists don't engage in hate speech, and they don't rip babies from their families at the border. Well, promising. Let's see how it pans out. Bernie Sanders, maybe in a Me Too move, because Senator Warren of Massachusetts introduced last week a plan for an ultra-millionaire tax on households with a net worth of $50 million or more. Well, Sanders has a new estate tax plan that would basically take it back to where it was before it was cut. And I'm not opposed to this, but we've got to recognize that anybody who meets the threshold, Bernie is proposing lowering it from $11 million of an estate to $3.5 million. Anybody who's got that kind of money has lawyers and accountants who make sure that when the key person dies, all that money is in trusts that avoid taxes. So I consider it to be a nice token gesture. And speaking of Senator Warren, she made a call to the President and Secretary of State of the Cherokee Nation today, and she apologized for her decision to take that DNA test to prove her Native American ancestry. And she has made repeated calls apologizing for what turned out to be a political blunder. Now, speaking of DNA, Family Tree DNA, one of the largest private genetic testing companies in the nation, is now working with the FBI and allowing agents to search its vast genealogy database in an effort to solve cold, violent crime cases. Now, a lot of people, when this happened with the Golden State Killer case, myself included, I was skeptical and wary. I don't mind seeing a bad guy with a string of crimes being captured and brought to trial. But this is a dangerous precedent, and the FBI has made some sort of an agreement. It's not a contract with Family Tree DNA, but the firm has agreed to test DNA samples, upload the profiles to its database on a case-by-case basis, and now they are expanding that collaboration. Another really distressing story about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and another reason why I call it a rogue agency. Last year, there was a protest in Sacramento, California, and the groups who were arrayed included white supremacists who were described by the FBI as Ku Klux Klan members. In fact, they were part of a different group, but put that aside. At the rally, fights broke out, and the white supremacists pulled out knives, and several of the black protesters with a group called By Any Means Necessary, who were there peacefully, using their First Amendment rights, were stabbed by the white guys. So what do you think the FBI did? They investigated the nonviolent African-American protesters for potential conspiracy against the rights of the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists. The FBI considered the KKK as victims and the leftist protesters as potential terror threats. And they downplayed the threats coming from the white guys, saying, well, the KKK consisted of members that some perceived to be supportive of a white supremacist agenda. I mean, haven't they even seen the movie Black Klansman? The FBI's monitoring included in-person surveillance. They cited BAMN's advocacy against rape and sexual assault and police brutality as evidence in the terrorism inquiry. This is a stunning violation of the rights of First Amendment activists who are being treated as criminal suspects. And we know, based on the work of A.C. Thompson, who's been on this program describing his investigation into Atomwaffen, this deadly white supremacist group that surfaced in recent years. And even going back to when Obama first took office in 2009, there was a report from the Department of Homeland Security that suggested that white supremacists were the key group to watch, not alleged Muslim-linked domestic terrorists. So this is a very troubling story. And we know that the FBI is conducting similar operations against would-be protesters of oil pipelines in the Midwest. Every day I pause to thank the people who support my work with your subscriptions to the Peter B. Collins podcast. And to my knowledge, nobody from the FBI is a current subscriber. But Julie Dupree, she kicks in $10 a month, and PayPal got the money today. So does Andrew Harnack, $10 a month. And who else is here? Jim McHugh. He contributes $5 a month. You can do it too. All you have to do is visit peterbcollins.com, click the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll land on the sign-up page, and you'll have options there, $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription. Yes, I've still got CDs by John Dist I'd love to share with new annual subscribers. And if you prefer to use the U.S. mail, my P.O. Box is 150660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Well, I am pleased to report that there is activity to protect abortion rights in this country. What disappoints me is that national Democrats have largely gone silent about abortion issues. But Governor Andrew Cuomo, who I often criticize, to his credit, signed legislation protecting abortion rights in the Empire State in January. And I want to single out a courageous woman who is a member of the legislature, I think the lower house in Virginia, Kathy Tran, because she is defending a bill that she introduced this week that would allow late-term abortions. Now, this is an issue that is heavily demagogued by the Christian right and many of its hypocritical advocates. Late-term abortions account for only about 1.3% of actual abortions that take place. No mother, no doctor wants to agree to an abortion in the third trimester. They only do so because of very critical issues, like a baby that is clearly deformed or not viable on birth, or a delivery that would threaten the life or the long-term health of the mother. And so in Virginia, the new Democratic governor, Ralph Northam, is a pediatric surgeon. And Dr. Northam made some comments about late-term abortion on WTOP radio in Washington. And now the right wing is just lowering the boom, referring to Democrats as baby killers, and they, embrace a culture of death, and that they promote infanticide. This, of course, is all a pack of lies. But as the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court will soon move forward to eviscerate national rights to choice, these state-level actions are increasingly important. Yesterday was a dark day for certain immigrants in this country. They were ordered by a notice to appear delivered by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the fine folks at ICE. And they did appear. Dozens of people made the effort, some people driving 4 or 5 hours, to arrive in time for hearings that didn't exist. Now, Homeland Security and ICE are blaming this on the government shutdown. But the attorneys say that that's not the problem. And this happened in multiple cities across the country, Chicago, Atlanta. Think of the people in Chicago who went out in 40 below temperatures to honor the notice that they had appeared. Also happened in Atlanta, Virginia, Miami, Texas. Immigration attorney here in San Francisco, Christabel Lee. Every city and every jurisdiction is doing this, obviously knowing that there really won't be a court on that date. These immigrants are standing with their kids outside with no direction. They're afraid to stand outside on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse because there could be other immigration authorities there. It's a really harrowing situation, and it happened before on October 31st. Well, this is going to really disappoint Rachel Maddow. Last night, she had Adam Schiff, the congressman who's now chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and one of the things they talked about was subpoenaing phone records to confirm the suspicion that after the meeting with the Russians, Veselnitskaya at Trump Tower in 2016, that Don Jr. called his daddy, and that they couldn't confirm the call because it was made to a blocked number. Well, Senate investigators in the Intelligence Committee, controlled by Republicans, have leaked to CNN, ABC, and the Washington Post information that the blocked calls were not between Trump and his daddy, but he made a call to a real estate investor who had worked with Daddy and the chief executive of NASCAR. Oh boy, there goes a lefty conspiracy theory blowing up. And this is what fuels Trump's call about fake news. When the media gets it wrong, when the Democratic speculation machine, the telenovela that Rachel Maddow presents every night, goes too far, it gives him the fuel to attack the media. And today, I thought it was yesterday, but it actually was this morning, the publisher of the New York Times, A.G. Sulzberger the Ninth or whatever it is, went with two of his reporters to a meeting with Trump at the White House. And the Times is trumpeting this as a big deal. Mostly what happened was Sulzberger tried to impress on Trump that his attacks on the media are bad for the United States and that other countries are using it to justify a kind of impunity that allows them to attack the media in their own countries or our own. And Trump just kind of danced around the issue and tried to get people to feel sorry for himself because the media has been so mean to him here. Good story at The Intercept today under the byline of Akela Lacey about the Green New Deal. And this is something we have to be really careful about because what the new progressives in Congress are talking about and what people like Kamala Harris, the California senator now running for president, when she talks about a Green New Deal, I don't know if they are on the same page. But get this. The House Energy and Commerce Committee, now controlled by Democrats like all the others, successfully persuaded Speaker Pelosi not to give much power to the Green New Deal. And Bobby Rush, who was once a radical but no more, he's a congressman from Chicago and number 2 Dem on the Energy and Commerce Committee, said that he's happy to see the end of a smash and grab that's pushed the committee to cede too much of our jurisdiction. The grab is over as far as I'm concerned, and we're going to return to regular order as we've exercised it in the past, and we stand on it now. We're not ceding any of the energy and commerce jurisdiction. So it's a turf battle. But it's also a battle over political contributions from oil companies. And Frank Pallone, New Jersey Dem, who chairs the committee, doesn't take oil and gas money himself, but he's not willing to make that a standard for service on his committee. And it's clear that they're going to do very modest things that won't pass in the Senate to claim that the Democrats are working on climate change issues. But the bottom line is they are not agreeing to long-term and significant moves to fix those problems. If you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, I encourage you to come out Saturday night to the First Presbyterian Church in San Anselmo, where I will be in conversation with Dar Jamail about his new book, The End of Ice. It's pretty stunning what he reports, and incremental moves will not really make much difference. Finally today, new information coming out about the lawsuits against the Sackler family. They own Purdue Pharma, and they own the rights to OxyContin, and they also own the epithet white-collar drug lords, in my opinion. And new information shows that Richard Sackler, who was previously involved with running the company, thought about, back in 2014, promoting a drug that would help people who are addicted on drugs, on OxyContin. They looked at producing a product, I'm trying to find the name of it here, Suboxone, Suboxone, a drug used to treat addiction. And once they had gotten millions of Americans addicted to OxyContin, I guess they were coming to help them get off the drug that they said was not so addictive. And this kind of reminds me of that Super Bowl commercial I saw last year, or was it the year before, about a drug that treats opioid constipation. I don't know if Purdue was promoting that one, but it would fit the pattern here. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. I heard there is a Super Bowl on Sunday. I'm going to go sailing. You'll find this podcast on YouTube, and I hope you'll share it far and wide.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling